The grand ballroom of the Denver Conservation Gala shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished marble floors. Towering windows framed the jagged silhouette of the Rocky Mountains, a reminder of the wild beauty the event aimed to protect. The air buzzed with the chatter of philanthropists, scientists, and politicians, all gathered to fund the preservation of Colorado's natural treasures. Among them stood Grayson Holt, a white American billionaire whose energy empire, Holt Energy, dominated the region's industry. His sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes drew attention, as did the tailored navy suit that clung to his athletic frame. At 32, Grayson carried the confidence of a man who'd built a fortune from nothing. Yet his smile held a trace of guarded vulnerability, a crack in his otherwise polished exterior. Across the room, Elise Parker navigated the crowd with quiet determination, an African-American environmental scientist. Her deep brown skin glowed under the warm lighting, and her tightly coiled hair was swept into an elegant updo. Her emerald green gown hugged her slender figure, chosen not for vanity, but to command respect in a room full of skeptics. At 28, Elise was a rising star in her field, her research on water contamination earning her both accolades and enemies. She clutched a glass of sparkling water, her dark eyes scanning the room for allies or threats. Their paths crossed near a display of rare alpine flora, where Elise explained her latest findings to a small group of donors. Her voice, clear and passionate, cut through the hum of conversation. She said the streams feeding Denver's reservoirs are at risk, gesturing to a map pinned to the display. Heavy metal runoff from mining operations is poisoning aquatic ecosystems. If we don't act, we will cause irreversible damage within a decade. Grayson, drawn by her intensity, paused at the edge of the group. He wasn't one for small talk, but her words struck a chord. Holt Energy had faced scrutiny over its environmental impact, and though he'd invested in cleaner technologies, he knew his company wasn't blameless. He stepped closer, catching her eye. "You're Dr. Parker, aren't you? I've read your work on cadmium levels in the South Platte River." "Impressive." Elise turned her expression wary but curious. "And you're Grayson Holt. Your company's name often appears in my data, usually not for the right reasons." Her tone was sharp, but not hostile, a challenge wrapped in professionalism. Grayson's lips curved into a half-smile. "Fair enough. I'm here to change that narrative." Could you tell me how? His voice was smooth, but there was a sincerity that disarmed her. The conversation flowed effortlessly from there. They moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom, where the clink of champagne glasses faded into the background. Elise spoke of her research with a fire that captivated Grayson while he shared his vision for sustainable energy, admitting the flaws in his industry with a candor that surprised her. The mountains loomed outside their peaks, dusted with early snow, and for a moment, the gala felt like a world apart, a space where two people so different in background and purpose could connect. As the night deepened, their talk turned personal. Elise mentioned her childhood in Atlanta, where she'd spent summers exploring creeks and dreaming of saving the planet. Grayson recounted growing up in a small Colorado town, where the mountains were both playground and inspiration. The air between them crackled with unspoken attraction, their laughter mingling as they shared stories under the starlit glow filtering through the windows. "Do you ever stop working?" Grayson asked, his gaze lingering on her. Elise tilted her head, a playful glint in her eyes. "Do you?" Before he could answer, the moment shattered. A man in a sleek black suit approached his presence like a storm cloud. Victor Lang, Grayson's rival in the energy sector, had a reputation for ruthless ambition. His pale skin and slicked-back dark hair gave him a predatory air, and his smirk carried a hint of malice. "Grayson, we've got a problem," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Pipeline issue in Weld County. It's urgent." Grayson frowned, sensing the interruption was no accident. Can't it wait, Victor? Not unless you want a PR disaster by morning, Victor replied, his eyes flicking to Elise with a dismissive glance. Sorry to interrupt your chat. Elise's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Grayson hesitated, torn between duty and the woman's pull before him. I'll be back, he promised Elise, his hand brushing hers briefly, sending a jolt through them both. Don't go anywhere. But by the time Grayson returned after dealing with what turned out to be a fabricated crisis, a minor valve malfunction exaggerated by Victor's team, Elise was gone. She'd left no contact information, no trace beyond the memory of her voice and the warmth of her touch. Grayson stood alone in the now quiet ballroom, the mountains outside looming like silent witnesses to a connection cut short. The weeks that followed were a blur for Elise. The gala had left her rattled not just by Grayson's charm, but by the intensity of their connection. She'd felt seen in a way she hadn't expected yet. She'd left without a word, afraid of what letting him in might mean. Her life was her work, her research, her fight for clean water, her refusal to bend to corporate interests. A man like Grayson Holt, with his wealth and influence, felt like a risk she couldn't afford. But fate had other plans. A month later, Elise discovered she was pregnant. The news hit like a thunderbolt, upending her carefully ordered world. She thought of tracking Grayson down, but confronting a billionaire with this truth felt impossible. What if he dismissed her? What if he tried to control her life, or worse, her child's? So she chose silence, moved to a modest apartment in Denver's Capitol Hill, poured her energy into her work, and prepared for motherhood. Grayson, meanwhile, threw himself into his empire. Holt Energy expanded, acquiring new contracts and developing solar projects to counter the criticism of its fossil fuel roots. Yet no matter how many deals he closed or awards he won, the memory of Elise haunted him. He'd hired a private investigator to find her, but the trail went cold, her name was common, and she'd kept a low profile. The gala became a ghost in his mind, a fleeting moment of what could have been. As months turned to years, Elise gave birth to a daughter, Ivy, whose bright eyes and curious spirit lit up her world. Raising Ivy alone wasn't easy. Elise balanced late-night research with diaper changes, grant applications with bedtime stories. But Ivy was her anchor, her reason to keep fighting. The little girl loved nature, collecting rocks and asking endless questions about the mountains that framed their city. Elise saw echoes of herself in Ivy, and sometimes in the curve of her daughter's smile, a flicker of Grayson. Grayson's life, by contrast, was a paradox of success and emptiness. His penthouse in downtown Denver overlooked the same mountains that had framed his night with Elise, but they only deepened his sense of loss. He dated occasionally, but no one matched the spark he'd felt that night. Ever the opportunist, Victor capitalized on Grayson's distraction, undercutting Holt Energy's bids and spreading rumors about its environmental record. Grayson fought back, but the battles left him weary. One evening, as Elise tucked Ivy into bed, the girl pointed to a photo of the Rockies on her wall. "Mama, who lives in the mountains?" she asked, her voice sleepy but curious. Elise smiled, brushing a curl from Ivy's face. "The mountains are full of secrets, baby. One day, we'll find out who they're hiding." She didn't know that across the city, Grayson was staring at those same mountains, wondering about the woman who'd slipped through his fingers and the secrets they might share. Elise Parker's life had become a delicate balance of science and motherhood. Her modest apartment on Capitol Hill, filled with warmth, was a sanctuary for her and Ivy. The living room was cluttered with books on hydrology, stacks of research papers, and Ivy's collection of pine cones and river rocks, each carefully labeled in her childish scrawl. Elise's days were long mornings spent analyzing water samples in a university lab, afternoons writing grant proposals, and evenings devoted to Ivy. The girl was a whirlwind of curiosity, always asking why the sky turned pink at sunset, or how rivers carved their paths through stone. Elise cherished these moments, even when exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Ivy was now 7, with a knack for spotting patterns in nature that reminded Elise of her childhood. They'd spend weekends hiking trails in the foothills, Ivy clutching a small notebook to sketch wildflowers or jot down questions. "Why don't the fish get cold in winter, Mama?" She'd ask, her breath puffing in the crisp air. Elise would explain antifreeze proteins in fish blood, simplifying the science until Ivy's eyes lit up with understanding. These outings were their escape, a way to leave behind the pressures of Elise's work and the whispers of doubt that lingered from her past. Her research had grown more urgent over the years. Elise's latest project focused on contamination in Denver's water supply, tracing heavy metals to energy operations in the region. The data was damning, pointing to negligence by major players in the industry. She knew her findings could make enemies, but she pressed on, driven by a promise to protect the land Ivy loved. Yet every grant rejection, every skeptical colleague reminded her how alone she was in this fight. Her closest ally, Maya, another researcher at the university, offered support. Still, even Maya couldn't fully grasp the weight Elise carried, raising a child battling corporate giants and guarding a secret about Ivy's father. Across the city, Grayson Holt's world was one of glass towers and boardroom battles. Holt Energy had grown into a juggernaut, its logo plastered on billboards and construction sites. Grayson had pushed the company toward renewables, investing in wind farms and solar arrays. But the transition was slow, and critics were relentless. Environmental groups called him a hypocrite, pointing to his oil and gas roots, while competitors like Victor Lang circled like vultures waiting for a misstep. Grayson's days were filled with meetings, contracts, and calculated risks, but his nights were quieter, haunted by something missing. His penthouse, perched high above Denver, was a study in modern luxury, sleek furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a view of the Rockies that stretched to the horizon. Yet it felt more like a museum than a home. Grayson would stand by those windows, a glass of bourbon in hand, staring at the mountains as if they held answers. The gala, 8 years ago, was a memory he couldn't shake. Elise's voice, her passion, her eyes had challenged and captivated him. It all lingered like a song he couldn't forget. He'd tried to find her, hiring investigators, scouring scientific journals for her name, but she'd vanished, as if she'd never existed. The not knowing gnawed at him, a rare failure in a life built on control. Victor Lang, meanwhile, was a constant thorn in Grayson's side. The man's energy company, Lang Corp, was smaller, but scrappier, undercutting Holt Energy's bids and spreading rumors to sway investors. Victor had a knack for exploiting weaknesses, and Grayson's distraction gave him an edge. At industry events, Victor would sidle up to Grayson, all false charm and sharp jabs. Still chasing ghosts, Holt, he'd say, his smirk hinting at knowledge he didn't share. Grayson ignored him, but the taunts fueled his resolve to outmaneuver his rival. Elise's life, though simpler, was no less demanding. Money was tight, and the cost of childcare often forced her to work late into the night, her laptop glowing in the dim apartment. Maya would sometimes drop by, bringing takeout and encouragement. "You're doing too much, Elise," she'd say, glancing at the stacks of papers. "Let me take some of this off your plate." Elise would smile, grateful, but guarded. She trusted Maya, but her secret about Ivy's father made her wary of letting anyone too close. The fear that Grayson might one day appear wielding his wealth and influence kept her vigilant. Blissfully unaware of these burdens, Ivy brought light to Elise's world. The girl had a habit of leaving small gifts on Elise's desk: a pressed leaf, a mountain drawing, a pebble smoothed by a river. One evening, as Elise helped Ivy with a school project about ecosystems, the girl pointed to a map of Colorado. "Mama, do you think the mountains have secrets?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. Elise paused, her heart catching. Maybe they do, she said, tucking a stray curl behind Ivy's ear. But secrets have a way of coming out when the time's right. Grayson sat at his desk in his penthouse, reviewing reports on a new solar project. His phone buzzed with a message from Victor, a cryptic jab about old mistakes catching up. Grayson ignored it, his thoughts drifting to the gala Elise and the life he might have had if he'd stayed by her side that night. He opened a drawer and pulled out a faded program from the conservation event, her name listed among the speakers. It was the only proof he had that she wasn't a dream. Outside, the mountains stood silent, their peaks shrouded in dusk. Those mountains held the weight of unspoken truths for Elise and Grayson, separated by miles and years. The secrets they carried of a night, a child, a connection left unfinished were waiting like the first snow of winter to blanket their lives in change. The auditorium in Denver's Civic Center hummed with tension. Rows of folding chairs were filled with environmental activists, journalists, and corporate representatives, all gathered for a public hearing on water contamination in the South Platte River. The room's high ceilings and stark lighting amplified every sound, the rustle of papers, the murmur of anticipation, the occasional cough. At the front, a long table held a panel of state officials, their expressions unreadable. Elise Parker stood at a podium, her posture rigid, but her voice steady as she presented her research. Her slides projected stark data graphs showing rising levels of cadmium and lead maps pinpointing pollution sources, and photos of murky streams where fish no longer swam. Elise's emerald blouse was crisp, her hair pulled into a neat bun, projecting professionalism despite the knot in her stomach. She'd spent years building this case, tracing contaminants to energy operations, including those of Holt Energy. Her findings were airtight, backed by months of fieldwork and lab analysis. But she knew the stakes. Challenging a giant like Holt Energy could cost her Grant's reputation and career. Yet as she spoke, her thoughts flickered to Ivy, her daughter, who was waiting with a sitter at home. This fight was for her, for a world where rivers ran clean. Grayson Holt sat unnoticed in the back row, his tailored gray suit blending with the crowd. He'd come to gauge the opposition, expecting another academic, looking to score points against his company. But when Elise stepped to the podium, his breath caught. It was her, the woman from the gala 8 years ago, who'd haunted his thoughts ever since. Her voice, sharp with conviction, was the same though. Now it carried a harder edge. He leaned forward, his pulse quickening, as memories flooded back their laughter. The brush of her hand the night cut short by Victor's interference. Elise clicked to a slide, showing a contaminated tributary, her words precise. Holt Energy's extraction sites in Weld County show a direct correlation with elevated heavy metal levels. Their waste management practices are inadequate, and the data proves it. A murmur rippled through the room. Grayson's jaw tightened, not at the accusation he'd heard worse, but at the realization that Elise was leading the charge. Was this personal? Had she known who he was all along? As the hearing opened to questions, Grayson stood his presence, drawing eyes. He said, "Dr. Parker's tone is calm but firm. Your data is compelling. But correlation isn't causation. Holt Energy has invested millions in mitigation. What evidence do you have that our operations are the primary source?" Elise froze, her eyes locking onto his. For a moment, the room faded, and it was just them. Grayson's piercing gaze, her guarded expression. The gala flashed in her mind, the warmth of his touch, the sting of his absence. She'd never expected to see him here, not like this. Her heart raced, but she forced her voice to stay even. "Mr. Holt, my evidence comes from 3 years of sampling cross-referenced with your company's production logs. The patterns are unmistakable. If you'd like, I can provide the raw data." The exchange was polite, but charged each word a test of the other's resolve. The panel moved on to other speakers, but Grayson barely heard them. He watched Elise, noting the strength in her stance, the fire in her delivery. She was different now, more complex, more guarded, but the spark that had drawn him years ago was still there. He wanted to approach her to ask why she'd vanished, but the crowd and her accusations kept him at a distance. Elise, meanwhile, was reeling and seeing that Grayson had cracked the wall she'd built around that night. She'd spent years convincing herself he was a fleeting mistake, a man who'd walked away without a second thought. Now standing in his tailored suit, challenging her work, he felt like a threat not just to her research, but to the life she'd built with Ivy. She couldn't let him know about their daughter. His wealth, his influence could upend everything. She gathered her notes and slipped out as the hearing ended, avoiding his gaze. Ivy was sprawled on the living room floor at home, coloring a picture of a mountain stream. "Did you win, Mama?" she asked, her eyes curious. Elise forced a smile, kneeling beside her. "It's not about winning, baby. It's about telling the truth." But as she tucked Ivy into bed, her mind churned. Grayson's presence changed everything. If he dug into her life, he might uncover Ivy. She couldn't risk that. Back in his penthouse, Grayson paced before the windows, the Rockies a dark silhouette against the night sky. Elise's accusations stung, not because they were false. He knew his company had flaws, but because they came from her. He'd spent years searching for her, only to find her leading a crusade against him. Did revenge drive her? The thought gnawed at him, but so did the memory of her voice, her passion. He needed answers, not just about her research, but about why she'd left him that night. The next morning, Elise met with her colleague Maya at a coffee shop near the university. Maya, a fellow researcher with a knack for navigating academic politics, sipped her latte and frowned. "You sure you want to take on Holt Energy? Grayson, Holt doesn't lose fights." Elise stirred her tea, her expression tight. "I'm not fighting him. I'm fighting for the data. The rivers don't lie." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Just be careful. He's got resources you don't. And that look he gave you at the hearing, that wasn't just business." Elise brushed it off, but Maya's words lingered. She threw herself into her work, double-checking her data, preparing for the backlash she knew was coming. Meanwhile, Grayson tasked his team with reviewing Elise's findings. He wanted to refute her claims, but some of him hoped she was right, if only to force his company to do better. He also ordered a discreet background check on her, telling himself it was about the case, not the past. Days later, Elise brought Ivy to a nature workshop at a community event in a Denver park. The girl darted between booths, collecting leaf rubbings and asking volunteers about local wildlife. Elise watched, her heart swelling, but her guard was up. She hadn't expected Grayson to appear, but he sponsored the event through Holt Energy's foundation. He spotted her across the field, their eyes meeting again. This time, there was no podium to separate them. "Dr. Parker," he said, approaching with a cautious smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." Elise tensed, stepping slightly in front of Ivy, examining a beetle. "My daughter loves these events. I'm just here as a mom today." Grayson's gaze flicked to Ivy, then back to Elise. "She's got your curiosity," he said, his voice softening. "Look, about the hearing. I want to understand your data, not fight you. Can we talk off the record?" Elise hesitated, her instinct to protect Ivy warring with the pull of his sincerity. "Maybe," she said finally, "but not today." She took Ivy's hand and left Grayson staring after them. A question was forming in his mind, and he wasn't ready to voice it. That night, as Elise read Ivy a bedtime story, the girl yawned and asked, "Who was that man you talked to?" "Mama, he looked nice." Elise's heart skipped. "Just someone from work, baby," she said, kissing Ivy's forehead. But as she turned off the light, the weight of Grayson's return settled over her. The mountains outside her window loomed, their secrets pressing closer. The university lab where Elise worked was a maze of humming machines and cluttered benches, the air sharp with the scent of chemicals. Elise stood at her station, peering through a microscope at a water sample, her notes scribbled with red ink. Her latest report was nearly complete, a follow-up to the hearing that would solidify her case against Holt Energy. But the pressure was mounting. Anonymous emails had begun arriving questioning her methodology, hinting at flaws in her data. She brushed them off as corporate tactics, but they chipped away at her confidence. She couldn't afford mistakes, not with Ivy depending on her. Across town, Grayson sat in his corner office, a glass wall framing the Denver skyline. He'd spent days dissecting Elise's report, his team confirming much of her data, but finding gaps that could be exploited. He didn't want to discredit her. He respected her work, but his board demanded a defense. The more he read, the more he wondered if her attack was personal. Had she known who he was at the gala? Had she left because of his company's reputation? The questions festered, clouding his judgment. Victor Lang saw opportunity in the tension. At a private club downtown, he met with a handful of energy executives, his smile sharp as he spread doubt about Elise's research. She's got an agenda, he told them, swirling a glass of scotch. Her numbers don't add up. I've got sources saying she fudged the samples to target Holt. It was a lie, but Victor had a knack for planting seeds. He'd already contacted Maya, Elise's colleague, offering a hefty research grant in exchange for insight into Elise's work. While struggling with her own funding woes, Maya was tempted, but hadn't yet crossed the line. Elise felt the noose tightening. At a faculty meeting, a senior professor questioned her findings, citing an article that echoed Victor's claims. "Dr. Parker, your passion is admirable, but we need rigor, not headlines," he said, his tone patronizing. Elise defended her work, her voice steady, but the doubt in the room was palpable. Sitting across the table, Maya avoided her gaze, her silence cutting deeper than the criticism. That evening, Elise vented to Maya over dinner at a quiet diner. "They're trying to bury me," she said, pushing her plate away. "Victor Lang's behind this. I know it. He's been gunning for Grayson's company for years." Maya fidgeted with her napkin. "You sure it's Victor? It could be the data. Science gets messy sometimes." Her words were careful, but Elise caught the unease in her friend's eyes. "You believe me, don't you?" Elise asked, her voice low. Maya nodded quickly. "Of course. Watch your back. Lang's not the only one with power." She changed the subject, asking about Ivy, but the conversation felt strained. Elise left the diner unsettled, wondering if she could trust even her closest ally. Grayson, meanwhile, was grappling with his own doubts. At a board meeting, his executives pushed for an aggressive response to Elise's claims, suggesting a smear campaign. "She's a nobody," one said. "We can bury her in lawsuits." Grayson shut it down, his tone sharp. "We fix the problem, not her. Find out where our operations are failing and address them." But privately, he wondered if Elise's crusade was fueled by resentment. He couldn't shake the image of her at the park, shielding Ivy, her eyes wary. What was she hiding? Victor's lies gained traction. A local news outlet ran a story questioning Elise's credibility, citing anonymous sources who claimed her samples were tainted. Social media amplified the noise, with trolls accusing her of fabricating data for fame. Elise's inbox filled with hate mail, each message a dagger to her resolve. She spent late nights in the lab, retesting samples, triple-checking her work. She wouldn't let them win. One afternoon, Grayson attended a charity auction at a downtown hotel, hoping to clear his head. Elise was there representing her university's environmental program. They hadn't spoken since the park, and the sight of her poised, determined yet visibly worn, stirred something in him. He approached her at a display of conservation projects, keeping his tone neutral. "Dr. Parker, I've been reviewing your report. There's truth in it, but the accusations feel pointed. Is this about me? Elise's eyes flashed with anger. Is this personal? I'm trying to save Rivers, not settle scores. You left me that night, Grayson. If anyone's holding a grudge, it's not me. Her words were a slap revealing a wound she'd kept hidden. Grayson frowned, confusion deepening. I didn't leave you. Victor pulled me away with a fake crisis. I came back, but you were gone. They stood inches apart, the air thick with unspoken history. Before Elise could respond, a reporter interrupted, asking for a quote on the contamination controversy. She excused herself, leaving Grayson with more questions than answers. That night, Elise sat with Ivy, helping her build a model of a watershed for a school project. The girls' laughter eased the weight on Elise's shoulders, but her thoughts drifted to Grayson's words. Had she misjudged him? The idea unsettled her, but so did the growing smear campaign. Maya's hesitance wasn't helping because she needed allies, not enemies. Back in his penthouse, Grayson pored over Elise's research again, this time with a different lens. He saw her precision and passion, which reminded him of the woman he'd met years ago. But Victor's shadow loomed. A tip from a colleague hinted that Lang was spreading the rumors, possibly with inside help. Grayson called his lawyer Lucas, instructing him to dig into Victor's moves. Find out what he's playing at, he said, and keep it quiet. As Elise tucked Ivy into bed, the girl clutched a stuffed bear and asked, Mama, why are people mad at you? I heard you talking about bad water. Elise's heart ached. She kissed Ivy's forehead, whispering, Some people don't like the truth, baby, but we keep fighting for it. Outside, the mountains stood dark and silent, their secrets tangled with lies and half-truths, pulling Elise and Grayson closer to a reckoning neither could avoid. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Denver's city park, where families picnicked and children chased each other through the grass. Elise Parker stood near a playground, watching Ivy swing from the monkey bars, her laughter a bright note in the autumn air. Elise's mind, however, was elsewhere, on the anonymous emails accusing her of falsifying data, the whispers at the university, and the lingering sting of her last encounter with Grayson Holt. She'd built a fortress around her life with Ivy, but the cracks were showing, and Grayson's reappearance threatened to widen them. Grayson, meanwhile, was at the same park attending a community outreach event sponsored by Holt Energy. He'd hoped the casual setting might clear his head, but his thoughts kept circling back to Elise. Her accusations at the hearing and guarded demeanor at the auction didn't add up. Was she protecting something, or out to destroy his company? He scanned the crowd, half hoping to see her, when his eyes landed on a girl at the playground. She was small, with a mop of curly hair, and something about her tugged at him, a familiarity he couldn't place. Oblivious to the world beyond her game, Ivy leapt from the bars and ran toward a water fountain. Grayson watched, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand. When she tripped, scraping her knee, he moved before he could think, kneeling to offer her a tissue from his pocket. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, his voice gentle. Ivy looked up, her eyes wide and curious. "I'm fine. Thanks, mister." She took the tissue, studying him with a tilt of her head. "Do I know you?" "You look like someone." Grayson's heart skipped, a strange warmth spreading through him. "Maybe I have one of those faces," he said, smiling. But as Ivy ran back to Elise, he couldn't shake the feeling that her eyes, bright searching, were a mirror of his own. He watched her rejoin Elise, who glanced his way, her expression tightening. She grabbed Ivy's hand and hurried toward the parking lot. That night, Grayson couldn't sleep. The girl's face haunted him, stirring a suspicion he couldn't ignore. He called Lucas, his lawyer and closest confidant, who'd been digging into Victor Lang's schemes. "Lucas, please do something else," Grayson said, his voice low. "Find out everything you can about Elise Parker's daughter." Discreetly. Lucas hesitated. "You sure about this?" Grayson sounds personal. It is, Grayson admitted, but I need to know. A week later, Lucas delivered a thin file to Grayson's office. It contained public records, Ivy's birth certificate listing Elise as the mother and the father's name blank. 8 years ago, 9 months after the gala, the timing hit Grayson like a punch. He didn't need more proof, but he wanted certainty. Against Lucas's advice, he arranged for a DNA test using a contact at a private lab. The sample was tricky. Grayson had to rely on a discarded juice box Ivy left at a school event he'd sponsored. It felt invasive, but the question consumed him. Elise, meanwhile, was drowning in work. The smear campaign had intensified with a second news article questioning her credentials. Maya, her colleague, had grown distant, offering vague excuses about her projects. Elise spent late nights in the lab reanalyzing data to counter the accusations. Her only solace was Ivy, who sensed her mother's stress and left small drawings on her desk. Mountains, rivers, a stick-figure family with just 2 people. Each one broke Elise's heart a little more. She'd kept Ivy's paternity a secret to protect her, but now Grayson's presence threatened that shield. The DNA results returned 2 weeks later and were delivered to Grayson's penthouse in a sealed envelope. He stared at it for an hour before opening it, the weight of what it might mean pressing against his chest. The report was clear, a 99.9% match. Ivy was his daughter. The realization was both a lightning bolt and a void joy at the discovery, rage at the years lost, and guilt for not knowing sooner. He thought of Elise, of her silence, and anger flared. Why hadn't she told him? Had she judged him unworthy from the start? He confronted her at the university, catching her as she left the lab. The hallway was quiet, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "Elise," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk. Now." She froze, clutching her laptop bag. "About what?" "Your company's still polluting the river, if that's what you mean." "Don't," he said, stepping closer. "I know about Ivy. She's mine, isn't she?" Elise's face went still, her eyes darting to the empty corridor. "She said you don't know what you're talking about." But her voice shook. She tried to move past him, but he blocked her path, not threateningly, but with a desperation she hadn't seen before. "I had a test done," he said, holding up the report. "She's my daughter. Why didn't you tell me?" Elise's breath caught panic rising. For years, she'd feared this moment, imagined him storming into her life with lawyers and money taking Ivy away. She snapped that you don't get to waltz in after 8 years and claim her. "She's my daughter. I raised her. You were gone. I didn't know." Grayson's voice rose, then softened. "I looked for you, Elise. After the gala, I tried. You vanished." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "I didn't vanish. I survived. And I'm not letting you disrupt her life now." She pushed past him, her heart pounding, and fled to her car. Grayson didn't follow, but his silence felt heavier than any argument. At home, Elise held Ivy tighter as they read a bedtime story. The girl sensed something was wrong, her small hand patting Elise's arm. "Are you sad, Mama?" she asked. "Just tired." "Baby," Elise lied, kissing her forehead. But as Ivy slept, Elise sat by the window staring at the Rockies' dark outline. Grayson knew. There was no going back. In his penthouse, Grayson poured a bourbon and stared at the same mountains. The DNA report lay on his desk, a truth he couldn't unlearn. He wanted to be angry and blame Elise, but the memory of Ivy's smile stopped him. She was his daughter, and he'd missed 8 years of her life. He needed to know her to be part of her world, but Elise's fear was a wall he didn't know how to climb. Ivy, meanwhile, was piecing together her own puzzle. At school, she'd overheard kids talking about the rich man who'd sponsored their field trip. She remembered Grayson's kind eyes at the park, how he'd seemed familiar. One night, as Elise tucked her in, Ivy asked Mama, "Do I have a dad? Like a real one?" Elise's heart stopped. She forced a smile, brushing a curl from Ivy's face. "You've got me, sweetheart. That's all you need." But Ivy's question lingered, a spark that would soon ignite. The mountains outside held their secrets, but the truth about Ivy was out binding Elise and Grayson in a fragile, fraught connection neither was ready to face. The lab was a wreck. Elise stood in the doorway, her breath shallow as she surveyed the damage. Broken glass littered the floor, computers smoked from shattered screens, and her meticulously organized files were scattered like leaves in a storm. The university's security team had called her at dawn reporting a break-in. Now, as morning light filtered through the lab's windows, the destruction felt personal. Her research years of water samples, data logs, and field notes was partially gone, charred remnants of hard drives smoldering in a corner. The police called it vandalism, but Elise knew better. This was Victor Lang's work. She salvaged what she could, her hands trembling as she sorted through singed papers. The anonymous emails, the news articles now. This Victor was escalating, trying to silence her. Her accusations against Holt Energy had hit a nerve, but Victor's company LangCorp had the most to hide. She'd found traces of illegal dumping in her data linked to LangCorp's operations, and she'd been naive to think he'd let it slide. Across town, Grayson Holt was in his office, staring at a report from Lucas. The lawyer had uncovered whispers of Victor's involvement in shady deals, offshore accounts, bribes to regulators, and a possible connection to the lab break-in. Grayson's instincts screamed sabotage, but he needed proof. "Keep digging," he told Lucas over the phone. "Victor's playing dirty, and I want to know why." Lucas sighed. "This is bigger than you think, Grayson. Lang's got friends in high places." "You sure you want to poke this bear? I don't have a choice," Grayson said, thinking of Ivy. If Victor targeted Elise, he was also a threat to his daughter. He hadn't spoken to Elise since their confrontation, but the need to protect her and Ivy was growing. He called her, leaving a voicemail when she didn't answer. "Elise, it's Grayson. I know about the lab. I can help. Call me." Elise ignored the message. Her trust in Grayson was paper thin. She didn't want his help, not when it came with strings. But as she sifted through the wreckage, an email arrived from an anonymous account LangCorp's been dumping for years. "Check the old mine in Clear Creek." Attached was a grainy photo of barrels marked with LangCorp's logo, half buried in a remote site. Elise's pulse quickened. This was the lead she needed, but it was also a trap. She could feel it. She called Maya, hoping her friend could help verify the tip. Maya arrived at the lab, her expression grim as she took in the damage. "This is bad, Elise," she said, picking up a shattered vial. "You need to back off. Whoever did this isn't playing." "I can't," Elise said, her voice fierce. "If I stop now, they win. Will you help me?" Maya hesitated, her eyes flickering with guilt. She'd taken Victor's grant money, promising only small favors, but the weight of her betrayal was growing. "I'll try," she said finally, but Elise caught the unease in her tone. Desperate for resources, Elise reluctantly called Grayson back. They met at a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. The air between them was heavy, charged with the unspoken truth of Ivy. "I don't trust you," Elise said bluntly, "but I need help. Someone's trying to bury my work, and I think it's Victor." Grayson leaned forward, his eyes steady. "I'm looking into him too. Let me send Lucas to check out any leads you have. You don't have to do this alone." Elise bristled, but nodded. "Fine. But this is about the research, not us. Not Ivy." Grayson agreed, though the mention of their daughter tightened his chest. They organized a field trip to the Clear Creek site, a remote mining area in the Rockies. Elise, Grayson, and Lucas arrived at dawn, the air sharp with pine and frost. The site was eerie abandoned equipment, rusted under overgrown weeds, and a faint chemical smell hung. Elise spotted the barrels from the photo half hidden in a gully. She took samples, her gloved hands steady despite the danger. Grayson watched, impressed by her precision, while Lucas scouted the perimeter. As Elise worked, a low hum echoed through the valley. Lucas shouted a warning, and seconds later a gas cloud erupted from a hidden vent. Elise coughed, her vision blurring as she stumbled. Grayson grabbed her, pulling her toward fresh air, his heart pounding. Lucas found the source, a rigged canister designed to release toxins. This was no accident, he said, his face grim. They escaped, but Elise's arm was burned from the gas, a painful reminder of Victor's reach. At the hospital, Grayson stayed by her side, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "You could have died," he said, his voice low. "Let me protect you." "I don't need protecting," Elise snapped, but her resolve wavered. The attack had shaken her, and Grayson's concern felt genuine. When Ivy arrived with the sitter, she ran to Elise, then paused, looking at Grayson. She said, "You're the man from the park," her voice curious. "Why are you here?" Grayson knelt, his throat tight. "Just helping your mom, kiddo." Ivy nodded, but her eyes lingered, sensing a connection she couldn't name. Back home, Elise tucked Ivy into bed, her mind racing. The samples from Clear Creek confirmed Langcorp's dumping, but the attack proved Victor was desperate. She needed Grayson's resources, but letting him in meant risking Ivy. In his penthouse, Grayson stared at the mountains, the weight of fatherhood and danger pressing down. He'd protect them whether Elise wanted it or not. The anonymous emailer sent another message. "Victor's a pawn. The real players are watching." Elise and Grayson, bound by their daughter and a shared enemy, were stepping into a deeper web, the mountains hiding truths darker than they'd imagined. The air in the Clear Creek mining site was thick with the scent of damp earth and rust, the abandoned shafts looming like ghosts in the early morning mist. Elise Parker crouched near a stream, her gloved hands collecting water samples tainted with a faint chemical sheen. The barrels they'd found days ago, marked with Langcorp's logo, had confirmed her worst suspicions. Victor Lang was dumping toxic waste, and this site was ground zero. Grayson Holt stood nearby, scanning the rocky terrain, his jaw tight. Lucas, his lawyer, patrolled the perimeter, his eyes sharp for any sign of trouble. The trio had returned to gather more evidence, but the memory of the gas attack lingered, making every shadow a threat. Elise's focus was absolute, and her movements were precise as she labeled vials. She'd barely spoken to Grayson since the hospital where he'd stayed by her side, his concern both a comfort and a complication. Trusting him was a risk, but Victor's sabotage had left her no choice. Her research was her weapon, and she needed his resources to wield it. Grayson, meanwhile, was driven by more than duty. Ivy was his daughter, a truth that anchored him to Elise, even as her walls kept him at a distance. A low hiss shattered the quiet, like air escaping a valve. Lucas froze, his hand on his phone. "Get down!" he shouted, but it was too late. A cloud of acrid gas erupted from a hidden pipe buried in the gully, its fumes stinging their eyes. Elise coughed, her lungs burning as she stumbled toward higher ground. Grayson grabbed her arm, pulling her through the haze, his breath ragged. Lucas followed, cursing, as he dialed for help. The gas was thicker this time, deliberate, designed to trap them in the narrow valley. Elise's vision blurred, her legs heavy as she tripped over a rock. Grayson caught her, his grip firm but gentle. "Stay with me," he said, his voice cutting through the panic. He half carried her to a ridge where the air was clearer, but the gas spread fast. Lucas pointed to a rusted mine entrance nearby. "Inside now," he yelled. They scrambled into the dark, the damp walls closing around them. The gas lingered at the entrance, but the deeper they went, the cleaner the air. Inside the mine, the silence was oppressive, broken only by their labored breathing. Elise leaned against a wall, her arm still stinging from the last attack. This was Victor. She said, her voice hoarse. He's trying to kill me. Grayson's eyes darkened. Not just you. Us. He turned to Lucas. Can you get a signal? Lucas shook his head, his phone useless in the depths of the mine. We're stuck until the gas clears. This was planned, Grayson. Someone knew we'd be here. Elise's mind raced. The anonymous email about the barrels had led them here a trap. She cursed herself for not seeing it sooner. We need to get out, she said, her voice steady despite the fear. I have enough samples. If we lose this, Victor wins. Grayson nodded his hand, brushing hers in the dark, a fleeting reassurance. We'll make it, I promise. But the mine was a labyrinth, its tunnels twisting into darkness. They moved cautiously, guided by Lucas's flashlight, the beam catching glints of quartz and rusted tools. Every creak of the earth felt like a warning. Hours passed, the air growing colder. Elise's thoughts drifted to Ivy, safe with a sitter, but unaware of the danger. She couldn't fail her daughter, not now. Grayson sensed her tension, his voice low. Tell me about her, he said, as they rested on a broader chamber. Ivy. What's she like? Elise hesitated, her guard up, but the darkness softened her defenses. She's curious. Loves the mountains, asks a million questions. She's my reason for all this. Her voice cracked, and Grayson's heart ached. He wanted to ask more to bridge the years he'd missed, but a distant rumble stopped him. The ground shook, dust raining from the ceiling. Cave in, Lucas shouted, pushing them toward a side tunnel. They ran, rocks tumbling behind them. Elise's sample case slipped from her grasp, but Grayson grabbed it, shoving it into her hands as they ducked into a narrow passage. The collapse sealed the main tunnel, trapping them deeper in the mine. Panic clawed at Elise, but Grayson's presence steadied her. We're getting out, he said, his voice firm. He took her hand, leading her through the dark, Lucas trailing behind. They found a ventilation shaft, its rusted grate barely holding. Grayson and Lucas pried it open, the metal groaning. Fresh air rushed in, and they climbed toward the surface, emerging into the fading light of dusk. They collapsed on the hillside, gasping. Elise clutched the sample case, her lifeline to the truth. Grayson checked her for injuries, and his hands were gentle. You okay? He asked, his eyes searching hers. She nodded, too shaken to speak. The near-death ordeal had stripped away some of her armor. For the first time, she saw Grayson not as a threat, but as someone who'd risked his life for her. Thank you, she whispered. Lucas interrupted, his phone finally catching a signal. I'm calling for a pickup. But this wasn't random Victor's playing hardball. That night, Ivy ran to her at Elise's apartment, hugging her tightly. Mama, you're okay, she said, her eyes wide. She glanced at Grayson, who'd insisted on driving them home. You helped Mama, didn't you? Ivy asked, her voice full of trust. Grayson knelt, his throat tight. Yeah, kiddo, I did. Ivy smiled, and for a moment the day's weight lifted. Elise watched, her heart torn. Grayson's bond with Ivy was growing, and she didn't know how to stop it, or if she wanted to. Back in his penthouse, Grayson stared at the mountains, the sample case now with Lucas for analysis. The attack had confirmed Victor's desperation, but it also bound him to Elise in a way he hadn't expected. He'd protect them no matter the cost. But a nagging thought lingered as he drifted to sleep. Who had tipped Victor off tucking Ivy into bed? Elise found a drawing on her pillow, a stick figure family with 3 people now, not 2. Is that the man who helped you? Ivy asked, yawning. Elise's breath caught. Maybe baby, she said, kissing her forehead. The mountains outside loomed, their secrets tightening around her family, pulling them toward a truth she couldn't escape. The Denver skyline glittered below Grayson Holt's penthouse, but his focus was on the encrypted email Lucas had just forwarded. It contained a single line, Lang's a puppet. The real power wants Holt energy. Attached was a grainy photo of Victor Lang meeting a man in a dark suit at a private airstrip, the stranger's face obscured. Grayson's gut churned. The mine attack had been a warning, but this suggested a deeper game, where Victor was just a piece on the board. Elise, meanwhile, was in her lab, rebuilding her research from backups. The samples from Clear Creek had survived, and the analysis was damning. Lang Corp's toxins were leaching into groundwater, threatening entire ecosystems. She worked late, her desk littered with coffee cups, and Ivy's drawings each a reminder of why she couldn't stop. But the break-in and the gas attack had left her paranoid. She'd changed her locks, installed a security system, and kept Ivy close. Grayson's help had saved her life, but trusting him entirely was still a bridge too far. Victor Lang was feeling the heat. In a sleek office downtown, he paced before a window, his phone pressed to his ear. "The mine didn't work," he hissed. "They got out, and Parker's still got her samples." The voice on the other end was calm, cold, and commanding, a man Victor called the investor. No name, no face, just a shadow who'd funded Lang Corp's rise, and now demanded results. Holtz, distracted, the investor said, "Use it. Take his company, or you're done." Victor's smirk hid his fear. He'd underestimated Elise's resilience and Grayson's tenacity. The smear campaign wasn't enough. She was still fighting, and Grayson backed her. Victor needed a bigger move. He called Maya, Elise's colleague, who'd been feeding him scraps of information in exchange for grant money. "I need something damning," he told her. "Find a flaw in her data, or make one." Maya hesitated, her loyalty to Elise fraying under the pressure. "I'm not sure I can," she said, her voice tight. "She's careful. It'll look suspicious." "Then make it subtle," Victor snapped, "or your funding dries up." Maya hung up her hands, shaking. She'd crossed a line, but going further felt like a betrayal she couldn't stomach. Grayson, meanwhile, was piecing together the puzzle. Lucas's investigation had uncovered financial trails linking Lang Corp to shell companies, all tied to an unknown investor. The mine attack had been too precise, too well-funded for Victor alone. Grayson met Lucas at a quiet bar away from prying eyes. Grayson said, "This investor is nursing a beer. He's after my company." "But why go through Victor?" Lucas slid a folder across the table. "Money. Holt Energy's clean energy push is threatening someone's profits, someone big. Victor's their front, but he's expendable." The folder contained bank records, coded emails, and a name, Apex Capital, a shadowy firm with no public face. Grayson's jaw tightened. He needed to protect his company, but more than that, he needed to protect Elise and Ivy. Elise was grappling with her own battles. Her colleagues were pulling away at the university, spooked by the controversy around her work. Maya's distance hurt the most. She'd been Elise's rock, but now her support felt hollow. Elise confronted her in the lab, her voice low. "What's going on, Maya? You're avoiding me." Maya's eyes darted away. "It's just the pressure. The dean's watching us. Your fight with Holt Energy is making waves." It was half true, but Elise sensed the lie. She let it go, too tired to push, but the seed of doubt took root. Grayson reached out to Elise, insisting they meet. They chose a park near her apartment where Ivy played on a slide, oblivious to the tension. Grayson handed Elise a file from Lucas. "Victor's not working alone," he said. "There's someone bigger behind him. They want my company, and they're using your research to weaken me." Elise scanned the documents, her heart sinking. The scope was massive: bribes, cover-ups, and now attempts on their lives. She said, "This is bigger than my data." Her voice steady but scared. "But I'm not backing down. Those rivers are dying." Grayson nodded, his respect for her deepening. "I'm with you, but we need to be smart. They're watching us." He glanced at Ivy. his expression softening both of us. Elise followed his gaze, her chest tightening. Ivy was climbing a rope ladder, her laughter carrying across the park. "She can't be part of this," Elise said, her voice firm. "Promise me that." "I promise," Grayson said, and for the first time, she believed him. They agreed to pool their resources, her data, his connections to expose Victor and his backer. But the park felt too open, too exposed, and Elise hurried Ivy home, her senses on edge. That night, Victor met the investor at a secluded warehouse outside Denver. The man was a silhouette in the dim light, his voice like ice. "You're slipping, Lang. Holt and Parker are closing in. If they link us to the dumping, you take the fall." Victor nodded, sweat beading on his brow. He'd planned one last move, a fabricated report to discredit Elise completely. But the investor's warning echoed. Failure wasn't an option. At home, Elise tucked Ivy into bed, the girl clutching a stuffed owl. "Mama is the man from the park," your friend Ivy asked, her eyes heavy with sleep. Elise hesitated, her heart torn. "He's helping us, baby. That's all." But as she turned off the light, the weight of Grayson's promise settled over her. The mountains outside stood silent, but the shadow of the investor loomed, a threat neither Elise nor Grayson could yet name. The trail wound through the Rockies, a narrow path flanked by towering pines and granite cliffs. Elise Parker hiked alongside Ivy, their boots crunching on loose gravel, while Grayson Holt followed a few steps behind. The outing was Ivy's idea. A school project on alpine ecosystems had sparked her excitement, and Elise, needing a break from the lab's tension, had agreed. Grayson's presence was a compromise. Elise had hesitated, but Ivy's insistence and Grayson's quiet persistence won out. Under a crisp autumn sky, the mountains offered a rare moment of peace, though the weight of their shared secrets lingered. Ivy bounded ahead, clutching a notebook to sketch wildflowers, her voice bright as she asked questions. "Mama, why do some plants grow only up here?" Elise answered with practiced ease, explaining altitude and soil, but her eyes drifted to Grayson. He carried a backpack with water and snacks, his gaze soft as he watched Ivy. The sight stirred a mix of fear and longing in Elise. He was Ivy's father, a truth she could no longer deny, but letting him into their lives felt like surrendering control. Grayson was wrestling with his own turmoil. The DNA test had confirmed Ivy was his, but the years he'd missed cut deeper each day. He watched her now, marveling at her curiosity, her laughter, the way she mirrored Elise's determination. Guilt gnawed at him for the lost time, and his company's role in the environmental damage Elise fought against. He wanted to be more than a name on a test result, but Elise's walls were formidable, and he didn't know how to breach them without pushing her away. They stopped at a clearing, a meadow dotted with late-blooming columbines. Ivy knelt to draw a flower, her pencil scratching softly. Elise and Grayson sat on a fallen log, the silence between them heavy, but not hostile. "She's incredible," Grayson said, his voice low. "You've done a fantastic job with her." Elise nodded, her guard softening. "She's my everything. But this fight, Victor the investor, the pollution is for her too. She deserves clean rivers, a world that's not poisoned." Grayson's jaw tightened. "I get it, and I'm sorry for what Holt Energy's done, and for being absent. I didn't know, Elise, but I should have fought harder to find you." Her eyes met his, searching for deceit, but finding only regret. She admitted, "I didn't tell you," her voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared. You were this billionaire with all this power. I thought you'd take her from me." Grayson's chest ached. "I'd never do that. I want to know her, to be there for both of you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've missed so much already. I don't want to miss more." Elise looked away, her throat tight. Opening her heart to Grayson meant risking the independence she'd fought for, the ideals she'd built her life around. But his sincerity, his willingness to risk his life in the mine, chipped away at her resistance. She glanced at Ivy, who was now chasing a butterfly, her laughter echoing. "It's not just about us," Elise said. "It's about keeping her safe. Victor's still out there, and this investor, they're not done." Grayson nodded. "Lucas is closing in on them. We'll stop them together." He reached for her hand tentatively, and she didn't pull away. The moment was fleeting, broken by Ivy's return, waving her notebook triumphantly. "Look, Mama, I drew the whole meadow," Ivy said, climbing onto the log between them. Grayson leaned over, admiring her sketches, and Ivy grinned at him. "You like flowers too, don't you?" "Love 'em," Grayson said, his voice warm. "Especially the ones you draw." Ivy beamed, and Elise's heart twisted. The bond forming between them was undeniable, and it terrified her as much as it warmed her. Back in Denver, the fight resumed. Elise returned to her lab, where Maya's absence was glaring. Her friend had left a vague note about a conference, but Elise sensed something deeper: guilt perhaps, or fear. The anonymous emails had stopped, but the damage lingered. Her colleagues whispered that her funding was under review, and the press questioned her credibility. She worked late rebuilding her case against Lang Corp, and Grayson's resources now backed her samples from Clear Creek. Grayson, meanwhile, was battling his own demons. In his office, he pored over Lucas's latest findings. Apex Capital, the shadowy firm behind Victor, had ties to multiple energy companies, all profiting from lax regulations. The investor was a ghost, but their goal was clear control of Holt Energy. Grayson's push for clean energy threatened their empire, and Elise's research was a weapon they couldn't allow. He met with his board, urging them to accelerate their renewable projects, but they pushed back, citing costs. "We're not a charity," Holt once said. Grayson's frustration boiled. He was fighting for his daughter's future, not just his company. That evening, Elise and Grayson met at her apartment to review the Clear Creek data. Ivy was asleep, her drawings scattered across the table. The numbers were grim. Lang Corp's dumping had poisoned groundwater for miles. "This could shut them down," Elise said, her voice fierce. "But we need to go public and fast," Grayson agreed, but his eyes kept drifting to Ivy's sketches. "She's got your fire," he said, a faint smile breaking through. "I want to be part of that, Elise. Not just this fight, but her life." Elise's breath caught. She wanted to trust and believe he could change, but the stakes were too high. "We'll see," she said, her voice soft but guarded. As Grayson left the mountains outside her window, loomed their secrets, a quiet reminder of the battle ahead. The trail had given them a moment of clarity, but the world below was closing in. Elise's fears of losing Ivy, of compromising her ideals, warred with the growing trust she felt for Grayson. He too was torn, haunted by the years he'd lost, and the company he'd built now a target for forces he barely understood. Ivy, blissfully unaware, slept with a columbine tucked under her pillow, her dreams filled with mountains, and a man who felt like family. The Denver Convention Center buzzed with the energy of the International Energy Summit, a sprawling event where industry titans, policymakers, and activists collided. Chandeliers gleamed above polished floors, and banners touted sustainable innovation, but the air was thick with politics and power plays. Elise Parker stood backstage, her palms sweaty as she reviewed her slides. Her presentation exposing Lang Corp's toxic dumping could change the narrative, but it was a gamble. Victor Lang was in the audience, and so was Grayson Holt, both men pivotal to the storm she was about to unleash. Grayson sat in the front row, his suit crisp, but his mind restless. Lucas had uncovered more about Apex Capital, The investor was a silent partner in multiple firms, manipulating markets to maintain fossil fuel dominance. Victor was their tool, but his desperation was growing. Grayson had warned Elise about a rumored smear campaign, and now as she stepped to the podium, he braced for the fallout. He believed in her data, but his board was watching ready to pounce if her accusations backfired. Elise's voice was steady as she began her slides, projecting stark images, contaminated streams, chemical barrels, and graphs of rising toxins. LangCorp's illegal dumping in Clear Creek has poisoned groundwater for miles. She said her words cutting through the room's hum. This isn't speculation. It's fact, backed by samples and analysis. The audience murmured, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Victor, seated near the back, smirked, his phone glowing as he typed. Halfway through, a screen behind Elise flickered, displaying a forged report. Bold text accused her of fabricating data, citing independent audits that never existed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elise froze, her heart pounding, but she recovered quickly. "This is a lie," she said, her voice sharp. "My data is public. Anyone can verify it." She clicked on her backup slides, which showed raw sample logs, and her preparation saving her from collapse. Grayson stood, his voice booming. "I've seen Dr. Parker's evidence. Holt Energy has reviewed it, and it sounds good. The real question is, who's behind this sabotage?" His eyes locked on Victor, who paled but held his ground. The room erupted in whispers, cameras flashing. Victor took the stage during the Q&A, his smile oily. "Dr. Parker's passion is admirable, but her data is flawed. And Holt Energy's no saint. Ask about their Weld County spills." He produced a folder, waving it like a weapon. "I have proof that Grayson's company caused the damage, and she's blaming others for it." The accusation landed like a grenade. Grayson's board members glared, and the press surged forward. Elise, still at the podium, countered with fire. "LangCorp's barrels were found at Clear Creek, not Holt's. I have photos, timestamps, and chemical signatures. Mr. Lang, care to explain those?" She projected the damning images, and Victor's smirk faltered. Grayson seized the moment, addressing the room. "Holt Energy's not perfect. We've had spills, and we're fixing them. But I'm committing now. Half our profits will fund environmental restoration, starting with Dr. Parker's projects." The crowd gasped, his board visibly stunned. It was a bold move that could tank his stock, but win public trust. The summit ended in chaos, with reporters swarming, and Victor slipping out his folder unopened. Backstage, Elise confronted Grayson, her eyes blazing. "You didn't have to do that. This isn't your fight." "It's ours," Grayson said, his voice firm. "For Ivy, for the truth. I'm done playing defense." Elise nodded, a grudging respect forming. They weren't allies yet, but they were close. That night, police arrested Victor at his hotel, charging him with environmental violations based on Elise's evidence. Lucas had tipped off regulators using the Clear Creek samples. But the victory was hollow. The investor remained at large, a shadow untouched by the law. Grayson met Lucas at a diner, the folder of forged documents between them. "Victor's out, but this isn't over," Lucas said. "Apex Capital's still pulling strings." Elise, at home, tucked Ivy into bed, the girl clutching a new drawing, a river clean and bright. "Did you win?" Mama Ivy asked, yawning. "We're getting there, baby," Elise said, her voice soft. Grayson had sent a text promising to fund her next project. It was a start, but the investor's shadow loomed, a reminder that the mountains held more secrets than she could fight alone. The summit had shifted the tide, but the real battle was beginning. Elise and Grayson, bound by their daughter and a shared cause, stood on the edge of a deeper conspiracy, the Rockies watching silently. The Denver skyline shimmered under a late autumn dusk, the last rays of sunlight glinting off glass towers. Elise Parker sat in her modest office at the university, surrounded by stacks of research papers and a laptop glowing with data charts. The victory at the Energy Summit had shifted the tide. Victor Lang's arrest had validated her work, and public support for her environmental cause was growing. But the cost was steep. Her reputation was still bruised from the smear campaign, and Maya's unspoken betrayal hung heavy. Most of all, Grayson Holt's presence in her life, and Ivy's, was a complication she hadn't anticipated. Grayson stood in his penthouse, the Rockies a dark silhouette beyond his windows. The summit had been a gamble, but his public commitment to fund environmental restoration had won allies, even as it alienated his board. He'd spent the week restructuring Holt Energy's charitable arm, transferring its oversight to Elise's team. It was more than a business move. It was a gesture, a way to prove to Elise that his intentions went beyond money. Ivy was his daughter. Every step he took now was for her future, whether Elise fully trusted him. Elise, meanwhile, was grappling with the weight of his offer. The funding could amplify her research, restore contaminated rivers, and secure Ivy's world. But accepting it meant letting Grayson closer, blurring the lines she'd drawn to protect her independence. She'd spent years building a life on her own terms, raising Ivy without his shadow. His sincerity, his willingness to risk his empire, challenged her defenses. They met at a quiet park near Elise's apartment, a neutral space where Ivy could play while they talked. The air was crisp, leaves crunching underfoot as Ivy chased a soccer ball across the grass. Grayson handed Elise a folder detailing the charitable trust. "It's yours to run," he said, his voice steady. "No strings. You decide how it's used. Research, cleanups, education. Whatever you need." Elise flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the figures. It was generous, almost too generous. Why, she asked, her tone guarded. "You could have thrown money at any cause. Why this? Why me?" Grayson's gaze drifted to Ivy, laughing as she kicked the ball because it was right, and because of her. "I've missed too much, Elise. I can't change that, but I can do this for her, for you." Her throat tightened. His words echoed the regret she'd seen on their hike, the sincerity that had begun to chip away at her walls. She wanted to push back to keep him at arm's length, but the memory of the mine, the way he'd pulled her from the gas, risking his life, made it harder. "I need time," she said finally. "This doesn't mean we're anything. Not yet." Grayson nodded, his expression soft but resolute. "I'll wait as long as it takes." Ivy ran over her cheeks, flushed from play. "Mama, can Mr. Grayson kick the ball with me?" she asked, her eyes bright. Elise hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead, baby." She watched as Grayson joined Ivy, his laughter mingling with hers as they played. The sight stirred something in her, a cautious hope, a glimpse of a future she hadn't dared imagine. But trust was a fragile thing, and the shadow of the investor still at large loomed over them. At the university, Elise confronted Maya. The lab was quiet, the hum of machines a faint backdrop. Maya had returned from her conference, but her avoidance was palpable. "You sold me out," Elise said, her voice low but firm. "Victor got to you, didn't he?" Maya's eyes dropped, guilt etched in her posture. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice trembling. "He offered funding, but said it was just information. I didn't know he'd use it to hurt you." Elise's anger flared, but so did her sadness. "You were my friend, Maya. I trusted you." Maya apologized, promising to make it right, but the damage was done. Elise left the lab, her resolve hardening. She'd fight alone if she had to, but Grayson's support was starting to feel like a lifeline. Grayson invited Elise and Ivy to a community event at a nature reserve, one of Holt Energy's new restoration projects. The reserve was a stretch of reclaimed land, its streams cleared of debris and replanted with native grasses. Ivy darted between exhibits, collecting leaflets and asking volunteers about fish habitats. Elise watched, her heart swelling, but her eyes kept finding Grayson. He was different here, less the billionaire, more the man who'd knelt to help Ivy at the park. They walked a trail together, Ivy skipping ahead. Grayson said, "This place gesturing to the revitalized land is what I want Holt Energy to be. Not just profit, but progress. You showed me that." His voice was earnest, and Elise felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. "I was wrong about you," she admitted, her voice soft. "I thought you'd take her from me, use your money to control us. But you're trying Grayson. I see it." He stopped, his eyes locking on hers. "I love her, Elise. And I care about you. I always have." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Elise didn't respond, but her hand brushed his, a silent acknowledgement. That night at home, Elise tucked Ivy into bed. The girl clutched a leaf from the reserve, her eyes heavy. "Is Mr. Grayson gonna stay with us, Mama?" she asked, yawning. Elise smiled, her heart torn but hopeful. "Maybe sometimes, baby. We'll figure it out." Elise accepted Grayson's offer as Ivy slept, signing the trust agreement. It was a step, not a surrender, a way to protect Ivy's future while keeping her ideals intact. In his penthouse, Grayson stared at the signed documents, a weightlifter. He was in their lives now, not as a threat, but as a partner. The mountains outside stood silent, their secrets softening as Elise and Grayson moved toward a fragile, hopeful truce. The reconciliation was tentative, built on shared purpose, and a child they both loved. But the investor's shadow lingered, a reminder that their fight was far from over. Elise's heart was opening, but her independence remained her anchor. For the first time, Grayson felt like he was building something real, not an empire, but a family. The house on a Denver hillside was a far cry from Elise Parker's cramped Capitol Hill apartment. Its expansive windows framed the Rockies, their peaks dusted with early snow, and the open layout was filled with light and space. Elise had hesitated to move, wary of Grayson's offer to fund the purchase, but the trust's resources and Ivy's excitement for a yard had swayed her. Ivy darted outside as she unpacked boxes in the living room, chasing a squirrel across the grass. Grayson carried a stack of books inside his sleeves, rolled up, and there was a quiet ease in his movements. They weren't a family in the traditional sense, but they were something, partners in purpose, bound by a daughter and a shared fight. The past weeks had been a whirlwind. Elise's research, bolstered by the trust, had led to new projects, a network of monitoring stations along Colorado's rivers, a public database of water quality, and outreach programs for schools. Holt Energy was changing too, with Grayson pushing for stricter waste protocols and renewable investments. His board grumbled, but the public lauded his pivot, and stock prices stabilized. Victor Lang's arrest had exposed Lang Corp's crimes, but the investor Apex Capital's elusive mastermind remained a ghost, their influence a quiet threat. Elise stood in the kitchen, sorting Ivy's drawings into a scrapbook. Each one, mountains, rivers, stick-figure families, told the story of their journey. Grayson joined her, setting a coffee mug on the counter. "She's got talent," he said, nodding at a sketch of a clean stream. "Maybe she'll be an artist and a scientist." Elise smiled, her guard lower than it had been in years. "She gets that from both of us." The words were a bridge, acknowledging their shared stake in Ivy's future. Grayson's presence in the house felt natural, though they moved carefully, testing the trust boundaries. Outside, Ivy ran to them, her hands cupped around a pine cone. "Look what I found," she said, thrusting it at Grayson. He took it, turning it over with mock seriousness, making her giggle. Elise watched, her heart full but wary. The investor's silence was ominous, and Lucas's latest report had hinted at new shell companies tied to Apex Capital moving funds through international banks. That evening, they sat on the porch, the mountains glowing under a crescent moon. Ivy was coloring at the table inside, while Elise and Grayson reviewed her latest data. The monitoring stations had detected trace toxins in a new watershed, suggesting someone was picking up where Langcorp left off. "It's them," Elise said, her voice low. "The investors testing us." Grayson nodded, his jaw tight. "Lucas is tracking their accounts, but they're slippery. We must stay ahead, publicize the data, and keep the pressure on." He paused, his hand brushing hers. "We're stronger together, Elise. You know that." She met his gaze, the warmth in his eyes stirring something she'd buried long ago. "I'm starting to," she admitted. The moment was cut short by a sharp knock at the door. Elise frowned, her senses sharpening. It was late, too late for visitors. Grayson opened the door to find a plain envelope on the stoop with no sender or address. Inside was a single sheet typed in stark black ink. "Victor was only the beginning. We're watching." Elise's breath caught her eyes, darting to Ivy, still coloring, oblivious to the threat. Grayson's hand tightened on the paper, his voice low. "They're trying to scare us." "It's working," Elise said, but her resolve hardened. She wouldn't let fear win, not for her or Ivy. She took the note, tucking it into a drawer. "We keep going. More data, more exposure. They can't hide forever." Grayson nodded, his eyes fierce. "I'll get Lucas on this. We'll find them." He glanced at Ivy, his voice softening. "And we'll keep her safe, both of you." Later, as Elise tucked Ivy into her new bedroom, the girl hugged her tightly. "I like it here, Mama," she said, her voice sleepy. "Mr. Grayson makes it feel like home." Elise kissed her forehead, her heart torn between hope and fear. "It's our home, baby. Always." Elise joined Grayson on the porch as Ivy slept, the note's words echoing in her mind. The mountains loomed, their secrets now a shared burden. The investor was watching, but Elise and Grayson were no longer alone. They were a team, father, mother, scientist, protector, facing a future as vast and uncertain as the peaks before them. The new beginning was fragile, built on trust and a shared fight. Ivy thrived in the shadow of the Rockies, her curiosity a light in the darkness. But the envelope was a warning, a promise of battles to come. Elise and Grayson stood ready, united by love and purpose. The mountains, their witness to a story far from finished.